Dis menseregte maand. Dis tyd dat ons almal onsself so 'n bietjie meer vergewis elke nou en dan van wat menseregte is en hoe dit in jou lewe tasbaar realisties kan word. En daarvoor het ons hier vandag in die ateljee Mary Shuttleworth. Sy is van Youth Human Rights International en sy gaan weer met ons gesels oor menseregte, spesifiek as dit kom by kinders ook. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on Groot FM. Congratulations to the media for what you're doing to raise awareness about human rights. We really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's our job. It's what everyone should do, isn't it?
It's what everyone should do, and they can learn from you.
Mary, I want to ask, where did your love or your interest for human rights start?
Dis 'n lang storie daai, hoor. Ek was verskoon maar die Afrikaans, maar ek was op boarding school, Koshuis in Sastron. Daar het ek groot geword en so it's been a long journey for me, but I was born and raised during the era of apartheid, and as a young girl saw the devastating effects of discrimination. But you know, it really didn't start there for me. I mean, that was just how we grew up and we saw what we saw, and that was that. It was really when I had the opportunity at the age of 15 to travel to Europe. And I studied in Europe for over a year, and I saw discrimination. Basically what I was seeing in South Africa, and that's really where the aha moment happened for me. That's when I realized that discrimination does not have to do only with a black and white issue. It doesn't have to do with whatever. I call them the twos, T-O-O, too rich, too poor. They come from that country, because in Europe it's very small. So no, they come from wherever and we come from wherever. And I was like, that's ridiculous, you know? So it was really in Europe that I realized what a huge global problem discrimination is. And that was my passion. That's where it started, where I realized, wow, I want to do a little something, because I think this discrimination is stupid.
Officially, the International Bill of Rights hasn't been along that long. It's been just after the Second World War. It's not something that's been with us for the entire civilized history of the world. There has been instances where people have been referred back to artifacts where people have documented that, that kings have said, listen, people need human rights. But the actual Bill of Rights isn't that old, hey?
Exactly. Well, for me, I'm a teacher. So for me, I actually don't have a lot of sympathy with it. Because, you know, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights are 30 human rights. Now, I'm a teacher. It doesn't take that much to teach 30 of anything. You just have to be smart about how you teach it. It needs to be engaging. And as you said in your intro, it has to have relevance. They have to see, how does this affect me?
Personally,
what
directly.
is this? Exactly. So here's this very important document, and we can have this very important document, which is more than 70 years old, and I'm very happy to say older than me. So we have this very important document. But unless we can bring it down to a language, teach it in a way that kids can go, oh, I've seen that on the playground. Oh, that has to do about the bullying that I just saw this morning.
Practical experience of discrimination.
And so that's the whole mission of Youth for Human Rights, which is to take this important document, bring it down to a language that kids can understand quickly and easily, and then, for example, our little videos that shows them an issue that they've seen, that they know about. And if it's not exactly like that, they've pretty much seen something like that, because, you know, I've traveled around the world, and I have yet to go to any school that hasn't seen some issues of bullying. I mean, it's everywhere.
Wow.
So it's how do we relate this important document and we're actually talking about your schoolyard.
Wow. I want to know, because you started the non-profit Youth for Human Rights International.
Correct.
When did you start it, and what is the aim of this?
Sure. So we started Youth for Human Rights International in 2001, And the purpose of Youth for Human Rights is to teach youth about human rights, specifically the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then inspire them to become advocates for tolerance and peace. I'm a teacher. It's no good saying, okay, we're going to take a test. It's 30 things. You write them on the paper, you pass. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about who we are. And so we need to inspire those rights so that they realize, wow, that's the world we want. It's the nowhere in the world do we have perfect human rights. That's the world we want.
The ideal world.
The ideal word. You know, most people, when they hear about human rights, or they interview me or talk to me, whatever, when you say human rights, they immediately start talking about human wrongs. Now, human wrongs are huge. I mean, come on, globally, there's not a country that doesn't have it, okay? This way, that way, but every country has issues. We're talking about the future. I'm a teacher. We're inspiring the future we want. So we truly are talking about human rights and then seeing how can we inspire the youth to realize, wow, that's how we should respect each other. That's the responsibility, our duties. And then for them to carry that on. I'm a teacher, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Wow. No, it's good that you're referring to the youth. It's now, and it is what's coming in the future. We've referred to the past of human rights and where the declaration comes from. I think when we come back after the advertisement break, we're going to talk more about the future and more also about the pressing issues now that affect the youth, human rights issues now. Net hierna gesels ons verder met Mary Shuttelworth. As deel van Menseregte Maand gesels ons verder in die tweede segment met Mary Shuttelworth van Youth for Human Rights International. Mary, we've spoken about the past. We've spoken about the fact that there are wrongs in the world, but that human rights are the supposed solutions. That's where we aim for. That's what we aim for. That's the golden mark we want to hit. Is that the case?
Exactly. But I'm a teacher. So when I travel around the world to speak to so many groups, I don't even know how many groups of students, university students, whatever that I've spoken to, even ministers of education, chiefs of police, etc. When we speak about human rights, most people say, oh, yes, I want those. Oh, yes, we agree with human rights. And then the next question is very simple. What are they? And that starts the conversation because most people around the world, literally around the world, even law students, literally talk about human rights. They say, oh, yes, we want human rights. In fact, when I ask them, put up your hands, some put up both hands. Yes, we want those human rights. Great.
What are they?
Don't you think you should know what they are?
Yes. It's not just a happy, nice feeling.
Well, of course, hopefully it ends up with a happy, nice feeling.
But there's so much more to it, and there's also a responsibility to it.
Exactly. Yeah, well, talking about responsibility, that's my big passion. So to me, if I may, when I teach human rights with the kids, I say, this is the way I see human rights. Human rights are like a bicycle wheel. You have 29, there's 30 human rights. So you have 29 spokes to the wheel, the right to an education, the right to a nationality, the right not to be discriminated against, the right to religious freedom, etc., etc. But there's one human right that sits in the middle like a hub, like a bicycle wheel. And if you don't have that hub in any bicycle, it's not going anywhere. In other words, that one human right makes human rights work for you. You were talking earlier about how does it relate to us here, to me, right now. It's that hub. It's Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our duties, our responsibilities. As I explained to the kids in schools, I said, you have the right to an education. I'm here in a school with you. So, number one, you already have that privilege. Because not everybody does. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yes.
But here you are in a classroom. Now, if you want your education, if you want that human right, you have to do your homework. You have to participate. If you disagree with a teacher, good, bring your references. Let's have a discussion. But you have to take responsibility for your education if you want that education. And you can literally take any one of the human rights and say, oh, actually, I have my part. If I don't want to see bullying, good, I need to report it. I need to whatever, and so on. Every single one of the human rights.
My question is, if I'm a country that do not subscribe to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, do those rights still apply to my citizens?
That's a really good question. The United Nations right now, the United Nations is basically the United Nations. So it's the countries around the world, right? 193 countries are members of the United Nations. That's pretty much every country in the world. So there are very few instances where the country can say, oh, well, we don't subscribe to that, because that document, the Universal Declaration, is a foundation.
It's central.
Exactly, it's central. So the problem is that this document is not taught in all educational facilities, and that's what we want. We believe that every person, every child deserves to know what their human rights are. That's the only way we're ever going to see human rights. And it's the one document that defines it for us universally. So whether you're in India or South Africa, in the United States or Australia, as long as your country, which is pretty much everybody, is member of the UN, then that country basically, conceptually, has agreed that, yes, we need to respect these basic 30 human rights.
Mary, my question, just to follow up on that then, is let's speak about education, because we know there are a lot of countries, and we read about them still, where women or girls aren't allowed to go to schools. Those countries are part of the United Nations, yet they will go based on our religious beliefs, girls do not have a right to education. How do we bridge that gap? How do we find a solution for what is in the human rights that they belong to the UN, yet they go based on certain things that we don't believe, women have a right to education? How do we bridge that gap?
You are talking to a teacher. I'm sorry. The one thing that we have as educators is patience. You start with a child in sub A, sub R.
Yeah, grade one.
And grade one, whatever, and you take them through to the final year. It's 12 long years.
Yes.
And you have to walk that path slowly, slowly, slowly. You have to teach them 1 + 1. You have to teach them the ABCs. So as a teacher, you have to have patience. So this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And what you're saying is very true. And very often the word our culture is used as but our culture. I got it. But cultures can also change. And how do we change it? I'm all about, so what is the solution? Education. Education, education, education. We have to be willing to realize human rights is not perfect anywhere. So there's nowhere to go. I have a lot of grey hairs. I'm going to that country to go and retire if it was but it doesn't exist. So we have to be willing to use education. That's how we change conditions. Education. Just give the knowledge. They have the right to know that knowledge. Yeah. It's there. It's our human rights. Every student in every school should be able to put up their hands and say, I have 30 of them. They were agreed upon by my country, South Africa, in the year blah. And, I can't tell you all 30 of them, but it's this and this and this and this. Yeah. And I have my duties. I have my responsibilities. It is literally through education that we do change those cultural differences that are perception. Because when we don't want to change cultures. We just want people to respect basic human rights, and there's just 30 of them.
Yeah, it's very easy. Mary, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today and for being here and sharing your passion for education as well. It has been wonderful chatting to you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me here. And again, we need to duplicate you, talking about solutions, talking about the future, and the future we want. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Wys jou net, oplossingsgedrewe. Moet ons almal nie maar net dit wees nie. Hou op vingerwys. Soek 'n oplossing. En menseregte gebeur by die huis, dit gebeur by die skool. Kinders moet daarvan leer. 'n Mens kan 'n kultuur verander. Opvoeding kan 'n kultuur verander en jou beter maak. Alles rondom jou beter maak. Thank you very much, Mary.